Good evening and welcome to Harry Cole Saves the West, the show American grit meets British backbone. Tonight, when does a Cold War get hot? It's already happening in our streets, in our companies and even our phones. Another 3 people were arrested today in London accused of spying for the Russians. Spooks say it's yet more foreign proxies recruited across the West. Meanwhile, Russian and Chinese operatives are using sex warfare to seduce Silicon Valley executives and steal secrets. That racket is apparently costing America up to £600 billion a year. Dollars, rather, given we're in America. From London to Silicon Valley, we're being attacked from the shadows and it seems in the sheets. But are our enemies running rings round us? Joining us tonight is Rebecca Zelko, DC reporter for The Blaze, who's in the studio with us. Rebecca, our enemies are basically taking the mickey, aren't they? Are we woefully ignorant of what's going on?
I like to say that I'm woefully ignorant of most things going on in the world, but I don't think this is any exception. And I mean, for most people, it can be something as slick or as unnoticeable as, technology, something that even though I'm Gen Z, it kind of goes over my head. And so I wouldn't be surprised if, things were happening in my phone or whatever.
And then there's just the good old-fashioned honey traps, right? I mean, the Silicon Valley sex targeting. I mean, presume that's going to be a lot of guys as well as girls targeting Silicon Valley executives. But that's just good old-fashioned spying,
It's
isn't it?
the oldest trick in the book, isn't it? And I mean, I'm from California, and so this is not the first time that we're hearing of this sort of honeypot technique. Might I remind our viewers about one Eric Swalwell of California, but that's a different story.
Indeed. Well, joining us down the line from London is Will Geddes, a security expert. Will, are you there? How are you?
I am here, Harry.
Welcome back to the show. We're just talking about the oldest trick in the book, right?
Oh, yes, since the days of Mata Hari, Harry. Honey trapping has been a favorite very much of the Chinese, but the Russians have adopted this strategy as well. And we're seeing it on both sides of the fence in terms of genders. And it's one of those risks which potentially young, lonely, wealthy executives are prone to, whether that be at home or whether it be when they're traveling overseas. But it's a very effective tactic, and I deal with quite a few of the blackmails that quite often will follow.
So talk me through what's happening in London today. Another 3 people have been arrested for aiding and abetting, it seems, foreign power, Russia being namely the enemy in question. We're seeing this more and more and more. Is it a dramatic increase in espionage, or are we just getting better at spotting it?
Well, we've seen an increase, Harry, of about 3 times in the last couple of years in the espionage activities. And this is right across the kinetic spectrum. So everything from the honey traps, as you mentioned, through to sabotage, to surveillance, to assassinations. And we've certainly heard of enough individuals that are not friends of Putin, allegedly, that have taken a bit of a swallow dive off the top of their very prestigious apartments. So again, these acts are quite often being undertaken by operatives, one would allege from the GRU unit, which is their sort of clandestine arm of the FSB, or the KGB as they were once known, who will conduct surveillance, but they'll also look at individuals to recruit, and whether that be by coherence or collaboration through financial incentive, or whether it be through blackmail, to then provide what I call a puddle jump, which is moving from one prospect to the next and moving their way up the chain. And we've seen a lot of this happening.
Look, we've seen chemical weapons attacks, arguably by the GRU. It was identified as their operatives that attacked Salisbury back in 2018, I believe it was. We've seen spies poisoned on the streets of London, murdered in American cities, shot in Germany. The Russians are running rings around us, aren't they?
They are running rings around us, Harry, and also the spread of targets which they're looking to aim at is pretty broad as well. There was a list of 21 individuals named on what they call the stop list from Russia, which is issued by their Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I had the prestige of being actually named on that list myself. But you look at individuals that are right across the private sector like me, to people in the media, to people who are not considered to be friends of Russia, that perhaps maybe, and I'm excluding myself, but perhaps have influence, obviously, on a broader section. They're running a very multi-platformed strategy to try and ensure that they are furthering their message and skewing any other counter message.
I mean, it seems to me that governments across the West are very keen and very able and very willing to openly blame the Russians, to publish their names when they're arrested and charged and put on trial, kicking out hundreds of diplomats over the years for espionage just in the last decade. From I can think of countless times. When the Russians do it, it's called out. When the Chinese do it, it's sort of hush hush. It's let's not upset them. Let's not upset our trade deficits. Let's collapse a spy trial, as we've discussed before, you and I. How bad is, compared to the Russians, how bad are the Chinese? And are we hearing, presumably not, quite the level of infiltration and penetration that they've achieved across the West?
All your points there are incredibly valid.
You can come back. You can come back again, Will. That's what we like to hear.
And I would say the best way to describe the difference in the tradecraft between the Russians and the Chinese is the Russians use a sledgehammer to achieve their aim in many regards, whether it be cyber, whether it be sabotage, whether it be kidnapping, assassination, poisoning, or otherwise. And then you look at the Chinese, and the Chinese are far more clandestine. They're very clever about inveigling their ways into commerce, in technology, into business, into various different ways. And they'll do it very, very, very subtly. We've got to remember Sun Tzu came from China, and The Art of War, which was written 800 years BC or thereabouts. They've been working on very, very skillful strategies to try and achieve their aims. And we're seeing evidence of it, although, to be absolutely honest, much of it's going beneath the surface, Harry, and very little of it's actually being detected until it's too late.
We'll get his stay there. We're going to bring in Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, YouTube star extraordinaire. Good evening, Colonel. Welcome back to the show. Just discussing there with Will the sledgehammer of the Russians and the subtlety of the Chinese. Who do you think is the bigger threat to the West?
Well, I actually I'm part of that group that doesn't think either one of them need to be a threat. They're both competitors, and I think that we make them more of an enemy than we do of a competitor, somebody that we can ever work with, because we only seem to want to find ways to push them down and to cut their feet out from under them, et cetera, instead of even looking for ways to win-win, which we used to do in the past. So right now, they're both. If you want to make them an enemy, they can be a bad enemy, and it can be a problem in either direction. And I think that seems to be the path we've chosen, and I think that we're getting, in large part, exactly what we're asking for.
Well, it talks about hostile states and state-backed actors, and we could talk to the cows come home about the long history of espionage between countries. Interesting stories around today about the level of espionage in the private sector. And companies targeting each other. Colonel, talk us through, is this entire world that we're not really, it's very murky. Obviously, technology-based companies themselves are probably spying on each other. But then are they also open to states and other, foreign companies infiltrating them?
I mean, without question, they are. I mean, that's certainly a case that, I mean, you can't look any further than my own country. I mean, our CIA in the past has done exactly that. We've actually physically used front companies to do kinds of espionage all over the planet. So unfortunately, our hands are not clean, and you can definitely count on the fact that both Russia and China and really all kinds of states, and even the UK. I mean, I can't even say that that's going on all over the place over there as well. It's just tradecraft. It's what we're all doing on each other. The question is, what's going to be the most effective and what produces the best outcomes for our side? Because you don't want to get into a place where all you're doing is harming the other side, because then that's going to have blowback on yourself. You want to be aware of what's going on, and especially identify anything untoward that's happening towards you, or if they're stealing your intellectual property, you want to put the kibosh on that right away. But let's also simultaneously look for ways to cooperate and to reduce the reason why they would want to do some of those things, and to try and to get places where we can get cooperation where we can and resist where we must.
We'll get it. You're nodding along there. You advise companies, you advise business people, you advise governments on how to avoid this stuff. Is it too good to be true often in this case? What would you be advising technology firms right now if they bumped into a pretty man or a lady in a bar?
Well, Harry, I couldn't agree with the Lieutenant Colonel more in terms of the points that he raised. I think, yes, I think you've got to look at your own stock, Harry, and you've got to measure it against whoever might approach you. And if it's someone who's especially pretty or handsome, then you've got to be a little bit suspicious. As the old adage goes, Harry, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is.
What keeps you up at night, though, Will Gettys? What's the one thing that is not getting enough attention at the moment? What's the one sort of angle or piece of tradecraft or spycraft that we seem so most blind to?
Okay, I would say probably, and this applies from both sides of the pond, our dear friends in the United States and also here in the United Kingdom, it's political influence. There are two aspects, really, and that's firstly by individuals, low-level staffers that are being recruited to affect introductions, possibly even to put their seniors or contacts into compromising positions. And we know this is happening very, very regularly with individuals that do have influence, whether it be in Congress, Senate, or it's in Parliament here in the United Kingdom. The second thing is social media. It is a bane of our lives. And China, we know, are using a lot of bot farms to try and propel certain messages, obviously, and inject into the youth's minds particular political persuasions and agendas. And I think and there's a lot of confusion that's going on. And I think that's only evidence. Spend one day on social media, you'll see so many conflicting messages. And therefore, I think the big data companies, the Metas of this world, the Googles of this world, have to be very cautious with their algorithms and their management of this data.
Colonel, you're nodding along there. We've been taken for mugs, really, aren't we? We're literally making it easier for our opponents or our enemies, or as you say, our competitors, to run rings down us by, giving them, we're all carrying one of these. We spend 11 hours a day on it, some of us. We are letting our enemies into our minds.
Well, we are. I mean, there's no two ways around it. That's exactly what is happening. And we want to say that we're going to be more careful. But I mean, I'm talking to you on my phone right here in Boston. So I'm sure that somebody, if they want to, can walk in and get hold of it. But it becomes such an integral part of our normal life that you just can't turn it off. So that you're going to have to do what you can to find, protections and economic or electronic protection measures or whatever, and be careful what you're doing and be careful what you put on the thing too. That's also careful. But one of the other things I would add to what your other excellent guest there just said is that don't overestimate your ability to figure stuff out and to know you're smarter than the other guys, and don't underestimate the other side either. Both of those, I think, add to the problems and make it more difficult for us to actually keep ourselves safe.
Colonel, while I've got you, I mean, it's a slightly different topic, but I know we had a long discussion last week about what is going on in Latin America. You were cautioning the Pentagon and the White House against further involvement. Donald Trump is making some noises tonight that we could see some land action in Venezuela tonight. The air defences in Caracas are on high alert for sure. All sorts of mysterious activity going on over the Caribbean tonight. Can I get your response to that and anything you're hearing?
Huge problem, huge mistake. I mean, I actually had on my show earlier just today, I talked about how 14% of the U.S. Navy fleet has gone in there into the region. We've accelerated our amount of air power, sea power, troops that are in the ground, Marines, etc. There is nothing good to get here. Whatever they're saying about this is about, keeping drugs out of America, that's BS. I'm sorry. Just going to call that straight out. It's not. Venezuela is like number 20th on the list. And if you're bypassing everybody above, then that's not your reason. The fact that you've allowed the CIA to go in there and to conduct operations on the ground, and now apparently we're talking even more so. It's supposed to be against the U.S. law and against the U.S. Constitution for the President of the United States, any man, whoever's holding that job, to take the U.S. forces into lethal combat operations against another country. He's already done it with Iran. Nobody said anything about it. And now then you keep doing it. And now then it looks like he's using it as a plaything for something else. There is nothing. I'll just categorically say this. There is nothing in American national security interests that validates doing this and going into military conflict in this country, in Venezuela or Colombia, if he thinks he's going to go there later. All we're doing is stirring up a hornet's nest. And I'm telling you, if you think you're going against the cartels, picking a fight with the cartels has not worked well for other governments in the region, and we're not impervious to that either. Don't pick a fight we can't win, and don't start a fight that we shouldn't even engage in. I pray to God that it doesn't happen, but as you say, there's a risk of that.
But I mean, there's some extraordinary images we're seeing in the last few days. Submarines, these aren't fishing boats that are getting caught up in this. Like actual submarines being used to to shift over drugs. We've had senators
Sure.
and Congress people on this show, throughout the last week, all saying that they believe there is a legal basis for what the president is doing, what the commander-in-chief is doing, and they've been briefed privately about the security threat. But it is your understanding that this remains illegal conflict?
It is illegal. I don't care what they're saying. It's self-evident. The Constitution is clear. The 1973 War Powers is clear. There is no legal justification. Even when you want to say that there has been in the past, there's been a UNSC resolution, something that authorizes international lethal operations, and there is nothing like that. And we're not even being told what the intelligence is. We are told, just trust me, we know all the details here, but we're not sharing any of them with you. If you're going to take America into war, and especially if you're talking about the government and the military of Venezuela, not just some drug boat, but the country, that requires that requires a declaration of war or an authorization by the Congress, neither of which is even on the table right now. So I would sternly disagree with anybody who says that. And again, there is no security issues that would require the use of force, which leaves us all to wonder, what is this really about? And I don't have an answer for that one.
Colonel, thank you for joining us tonight. Final thought from Will Geddes, if he's still with us. I believe he is. Will, with the greatest respect to our American friends, they don't have the best track record when it comes to intervening in South America. Do you share the Colonel's concerns there that Trump is possibly biting off more than he can chew?
Yes, I'd completely agree with the Lieutenant Colonel. British Special Forces have operated down in the region extensively with the counter-narco teams, members of both the SAS and the SBS. They've been very successful in a support capacity. For there to be a direct action by either US forces or UK forces, for that matter, as an ally, I think, again, could be biting off more than could be chewed. I think we would end up in possibly, and I mean, this may be a terrible analogy, but almost like an Afghanistan conflict. It needs to be directed mainly by intelligence and special forces in a very precision striking type of operation if they want to take out some of the channeling of drugs. But like the Lieutenant Colonel said, they are only one entity on the list of those that are involved in importing drugs, not only into the United States, but elsewhere.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Both repeat guests on Harry Cole Saves the West, and come back and see us again soon. Lots to chew over there with Rebecca from The Blaze. Rebecca, I mean, let's go back. Let's just rewind. We're going to come to Venezuela, and we're going to come to drugs, and we're going to come to bombings and fishing boats and submarines in a sec. But let's go back to the spying. Every time this sort of blows up, we get more stories. And as our guest was saying there, it's clearly well known what everyone's up to, from the Chinese to the Iranians to the Russians. Why do politicians always act like there's some great surprise to this? And, are they slightly are they in denial, or are they just taking us for mugs?
I do think it is a bit rich to pretend like, this wasn't on anybody's radar.
Yeah.
I mean, TikTok comes to mind. As an avid user of TikTok, I'm not going to pretend to be all high and mighty over here.
Yeah.
But that one was a pretty obvious one. And even that, I mean, that's still kind of an ongoing conversation. The fact that there is such a grave national security threat, and it's been there since 2019 or whenever the app was founded. The fact that it's taken so long to actually do anything about it, I think, is really telling. I think a lot of it, honestly, is just true Washington fashion. They're just kind of dragging their feet to actually accomplish anything.
Is it that no one kind of wants to, admit how bad it is? Is it, or are they being deliberately deceptive, or are actually they just being foolish?
I think I don't think I would say it's deliberate deception. I think it's more so I think there's an embarrassing element about being the greatest country, well, no offense, on the planet. And that's an argument we can have another day. But being one of the greatest countries in the world and still, having soft spots and still being vulnerable, I think that's a component. But I also think that it's just good old-fashioned bureaucracy in a lot of cases.
Let's talk about Venezuela, which is obviously, I mean, we don't quite know what's going on. There is all sorts of activity above the Caribbean tonight. Could be a dress rehearsal, could be a strike on Venezuela. The air defences are up, and as I said, in Caracas. Let's talk about the politics of this, though. The legal argument we've had with the Colonel there. How's the politics of this? Is this a president that's overstepping the mark? Does he have the right as the commander-in-chief to do what the hell he wants? And as the self-proclaimed president of peace, how wise is it, and how much support would he have from his own side in engaging in a potentially Afghan-like conflict, as Will Geddes said there, in South America?
I think that's what people are really weary about, is that And when I say we, I don't just mean Republicans or Trump voters. I think Americans in general are extremely weary and cautious when they see the state sort of start to meddle in foreign affairs. I think we saw a lot of the similar critiques emerge earlier in the summer when President Trump struck Iran. Everyone was kind of...
It worked though, right? I mean,
absolutely. No, and
short, sharp shock, no more nukes.
No doubt there. But there was that fear that it was going to pull us into something that we just couldn't get out of. And so, although there is obviously this ongoing legal conversation with the Rand Paul fans and then, of course, the more MAGA types, I do think that there is a tension there. There's a fear that we're going to get caught up in something that we just can't get out of. And so I think he should be cautious, but we also saw him pull off the Iran strike.
How popular is it, though? I mean, obviously, the drugs, parents, voters, Americans, deeply concerned about the drugs flowing into America through the southern border. This strikes me as something that could be quite, electorally, quite popular, right?
I don't think it's, I think it's popular to actually
try and do something. I think someone's doing something about it.
Exactly. Right? I don't think it's necessarily unpopular to try and do something about the cartels. I think the fear is, again, getting entangled with a foreign country, and I think also the severity of striking cartels or, they are cartels. I think some people are trying to say they're fishermen.
Well, I mean, you don't normally see fishermen in submarines.
I'm not an outdoorsman, but I have not heard of that fishing technique before. But again, I do think that there's some caution there that should actually be paid attention to.
And we talk about the sort of electoral coalition, but within the White House, within the government, how much unity is on this? Because obviously, J.D. Vance, Vice President, let it be known, he had his issues over striking on Iran. He was desperate to, he's very, very sort of well known as sort of on the more isolationist wing of this administration. Is it all harmony behind the scenes? Is it, does Trump have the support of his closest colleagues on this?
It seems like he does. I mean, at least publicly, there have been times where, people like Senator Rand Paul have come out and heavily criticized the president. And
I mean, he does that a lot anyway, right?
That's kind of his thing. That's sort of what he's known for.
He was the only senator not invited to the barbecue,
and, that wasn't the first time that happened. And I'm starting to think that he's just okay with that. He's made peace with that. But, as you mentioned, some of Trump's closest allies in the administration have always come to his defense. And so we can at the very least say that outwardly, J.D. Vance seems to be sort of a moderator, a mediating force between the isolationists and people who might be more
the president would argue that protecting American children and young people and citizens from drugs is America first. America first doesn't mean America, completely isolated. It means putting American interests first. Do you think he's making that argument well enough in 10 seconds?
I think,
no pressure.
I think he's doing it the best that he can, and we'll have to see how it transpires over the next few weeks.
All right. Well, coming up, America's national debt has just smashed through the $38 trillion mark. And once again, the Dems are at war with each other. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back after this. Hello and welcome back to Harry Cole Saves the West. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. You won't miss a thing. Just search Harry Cole Saves the West. Click subscribe. Now, tonight, the US national debt has just smashed past $38 trillion, setting a record that nobody wants to hear about, but everyone's paying for us. Still with us in the studio, Rebecca Zelko, DC reporter from The Blaze, and joining me tonight is Tim Rice, a recurring guest, DC bureau chief at the Daily Wire. I got it right this time. Guys, Tim, I'll start with you. 38 trillion. I mean, it's like a number that's so big that voters and people just kind of switch off when they hear it, right?
It's exactly right. It's the sort of thing where, when one of my reporters files a story on the debt to me, I tell them they have
Subs, please check.
Yeah, and I tell them they have to find a way to contextualize that, because what does $38 trillion mean, right? To me, anything over $10 million doesn't make sense to those of us. But you can't put that in terms. That's not a thing that you or any of us can buy. That's not, even if you think about the military, government spending, all these things, it's so outlandish. And that's why I think, as long as any of us have been talking about politics, we've heard about the national debt. This isn't going anywhere.
I think it's COVID, actually, that kind of broke everyone's kind of logic of numbers. I kind of always been the rule, if you've got anything over $1 billion really in an intro, people just sort of zone out. And the numbers that we were throwing around during the pandemic, on borrowing, on spending, on testing and tracing, and vaccines and warp speeds and all of that, has just kind of broken everyone's minds when it comes to dealing with these numbers, which should be absolutely terrifying, right?
There's nothing like a national emergency that'll convince the government to just spend trillions of dollars in a year.
Yeah.
No, I mean, living in D.C. for some time now, you drive around and you see the bus stops with the national debt tracker on there. And even then, it's somehow not really clicking to the elected officials that are responsible for reining it in. It's quite fascinating.
It's not sustainable, though, is it? I mean, we're in the middle of a government shutdown here, as Congress argue about the budget. You have this annual jamboree, which we don't have in London, where you actually have to sign off the budget. But it doesn't make any difference when the numbers are $38 trillion.
And to be fair, I mean, a lot of these lawmakers, they're not going to have to worry about this
none
much
of us
longer.
are going to be around when our
We're going
children
to
and
have
our
to
children's
inherit this
children.
issue. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a problem that people, our age are going to have to inherit for the next several decades, and it doesn't really seem like there's any effort to actually address it at the moment. So that's inspiring.
Jim, that's the point, though, isn't it? That's a moral and ethical issue about debt, isn't it? That this isn't us that's going to have to pick up this tab. This is our generations and generations beyond who are going to be owing the Chinese and the Japanese trillions of dollars for the next 200 years.
It's exactly right, and it really makes me miss a late lamented category of
Makes you
person
mad.
here in
Makes you
Washington. It makes me
cross.
mad. It makes me cross, and it makes me miss the fiscal hawks.
Yeah,
right?
where are they?
Both parties a long time ago had them. In recent history, the Republican Party had fiscal hawks. We had Paul Ryan. We had the late Senator Tom Coburn, a mentor of mine, men who this was what they talked about. They talked about this, and they made it real. They made it real. They made Americans think about, Coburn called it the debt bomb, like the way that we were passing this problem down to future generations. And they made it they talked about it in the same conversation as they talked about entitlement reform and tax cuts to make Americans think about it as an actual tangible policy instead of an abstraction.
But it was only 7 to 10 years ago. I mean,
Right.
This was national debts were a talking point across the Atlantic.
It's not fashionable
We had
anymore.
Labour's unexploded debt bombshells. Posters of ginormous bombs going off. As you say, people like Ron Paul and Paul Ryan, who were making this their sort of signature hallmark. What happened? Where did they go? Did the numbers just get so crazy? Everyone went, you know what?
I mean, I think a lot of them lost re-election or decided not to seek re-election. Yeah, right. The conversation left.
Yeah.
The Republican Party has decided to embrace tax and spend policy in a lot of ways the same way Democrats have. Not as bad, and the policies certainly aren't as bad, but there was this move sometime in the early first Trump administration, and I think we're moving away from it. I'm actually happy. I think we're backsliding. But there was this move to say, we're going to do what the left does, what the Democrats do, but we're going to do it to actually solve problems, to make America better. And if that costs money, and if that means putting off, reducing the debt, or if that means raising taxes, we're going to do it. We're going to do it to save the West, save the country, preserve the American family, instead of destroying these things. And I think that there is, you can make that argument. I'm not saying that is a bad approach to things, but I want that faction back. I want those gadflies back in the party.
Rebecca, is it just the fact that it is voter repellent to say, hey, austerity, cut, live within our means? It's not exactly the sexiest policy, is it?
It's not the sexiest, but there are a few still out there. Thomas Massie famously wears the pin on his shirt that has the debt counter,
clock,
the debt clock, exactly. Not the best of friends with the administration at the moment. Rand Paul similarly across the Capitol. They don't tend to get along with the administration at the moment. So as Tim said, not exactly fashionable.
Well, let's discuss some spending, some government spending that is costing the taxpayers nothing. Have a look at the latest pictures we're getting from the East Wing of the White House, which is no more. There it is. The East Wing has gone. £300 million now being spent on the new White House ballroom, and reports tonight that also ballroom plus some interesting things beneath the ballroom, including office space and a new nuclear bunker, according to reports this evening. Now, look, guys, I'm in two minds about this one. One, you think they could have put some screens up to avoid this. Like CNN last night they did 4.5 hours of live streaming of the White House being demolished. Obviously, it's a bit of the White House. It was only built in the 1940s. Tim, is this a problem for Trump on the image of it? Obviously, he wants to leave his mark on the country and on the building itself, but it's not great footage, is it?
I think it's a problem. I don't think it's a problem in the way that Democrats hope it's a problem. Neera Tanden, one of my favorite people in Washington, said on Twitter or on X the other day that, you know, Democrats should run on this in the midterms. I would like to heartily encourage Democrats to run on this in the midterms. I don't think the American people care in like practical political ways, but I think in terms of leaving a legacy, the way history is going to remember this, I don't think it's going to be the best look. I think the White House knows this. I think they're scrambling a little bit to, you know, point out that people have done renovations on the White House before. But I mean, in the briefing today, the most recent one that Caroline Leavitt could point to was Harry Truman in the 1950s. Of course, that is recent, but in political terms, it's also might as well be 500 years ago, right? That's like saying $38 trillion, right? Like, what does that mean? 50 years ago in Washington?
In the length of American history, that's basically a third of your nations. We won't go there though. Next year's going to be tough. 249 years. We'll let it go eventually. Does the president have a right to build a ballroom, to elect great big flags, to patio over the Rose Garden, to build an arc to Trump? You know, isn't this just going to sort of shift back to good old-fashioned, you know, aesthetics and building stuff, right? We should be doing this.
I mean, he's literally the president. I don't know what the fuss is about. I mean, and I was in a press conference earlier in the week where the president sort of, I think they're aware of the optics, which is that you see the White House being torn down. You know, they probably should have put up some screens or something, as you mentioned.
Unless they're just trying to send their opponents crazy, right?
They might be, you know, they might just be trolling somebody. It's classic. But he did say that he was really set on keeping this architectural continuity, the aesthetic continuity. That's really important to him. And he actually signed an executive order in his first term about beautifying cities and you know, the aesthetics as a real estate developer.
Again,
It's exactly, that's an important quality for him to have in the projects that he's invested in. And so I'm pretty hopeful. And actually, having been in many of these press conferences before, these rooms, I mean, it's a fire hazard. The amount of people that get crammed
that press briefing,
these
which used to be a swimming pool, right? And I think it was Nixon that turned it into the swimming pool, turned it into the press
bowling
briefing.
alley, the bowling alley, and then
So Caroline Leavitt at the White House press, she loves a prop, right? She brought along those, as Tim was saying, she brought along these pictures. Yeah, some of them are, you know, pretty old. Do you, just finally on this before we move on, do you think are they doing enough to sort of control the narrative on this?
I think that the damage has been done. I mean, literally, they've literally torn down the facade. They're literally coming down. But I also just think that the Democrats and the media, they're just going to say whatever they're going to say. That's kind of an unavoidable problem when it comes to messaging for the administration. I think it's one that they anticipated, to be honest. I think in the long run, especially once we see how beautiful it turns out, we're going to have amazing parties. That's not going to be makeshift tents anymore.
I mean, if the White House social secretary is watching, as I'm sure they are, we'd all be like to come to the I mean, I imagine it'd be the Charlie J. Kirk ballroom, right? I mean, that's where it's heading, I suspect.
I do, and I think that Rebecca just made an incredible point, which is that this is going to be bad until things are finished being built, right? And this is, I mean, look at Trump's properties around the country, right? Everyone likes to, we're going to boycott the Trump hotels, we're going to boycott the restaurants. They still go. They still look good. The protests outside of Trump Tower don't make Trump Tower less of a part of the New York City skyline.
Yeah, of course it did.
When he had the Waldorf here in D.C., people still went, you know, Republicans more than Democrats, but everyone wanted to go to the Jose Andres restaurant there. It's a fantastic spot, right? So, yeah, it looks bad, I think. I think maybe history will look back on it a little critically, but the White House is small. We need more space.
Absolutely.
We need more space for events. They certainly need more office space. Everyone's always complaining about that.
Same arguments happens in London. It's, you know, they have a word that rhymes with White House, but is slightly ruder in England for Downing Street, which is small. It's cramped. Every leader wants to go in there and redo it. My only advice on Trump properties, Trump Tower, it looks good. I would avoid the food. Looks like the Democrats. Talking of the Democrats, they are eating themselves alive. Bernie Sanders and AOC are lining up for 2028. The White House is tearing itself apart. Former White House is tearing itself apart over racist claims. And America's toxic boyfriend is back, still tweeting. Gavin Newsom out in California, threatening to sue Trump. Guys, I mean, we've talked about this already. We talked about this week after week after week. It still feels like the Dems are totally punch drunk. They can't, get into gear. They have no sort of focal point, no leader. Gavin Newsom's trying to do this cringeworthy, attempt at being Trump on X. All of these kind of crazy, he's picked a fight with Joe Rogan. He's threatening to sue the president. He's trying to sort of out-Trump Trump. But the problem is you can't out-Trump Trump, can you? Because without making yourself look like an idiot.
No, I mean, I will admit that the first couple of times I saw the all cast, I did laugh. I thought it was kind of funny at first, but to your point, it gets to a point where it's like, okay, what about anything else? Like, what do you stand for? And the fact that Democrats really tend to define themselves with Trump. They're not running on a particular set of ideas or policies, especially not ones that are popular with the American public. They're running on being not Trump. And I don't think that's going to be a very politically viable strategy for much longer.
Tim, I mean, Mandami looks like he's going to win. Is it next week, week after next, in New York? AOC is obviously becoming a sort of figurehead for the progressive left. You've got Bernie backing the main Democrat guy who's been exposed with a Nazi tattoo on his. I mean, the voters must be looking at these guys and being like, they deserve a long old spell in opposition, especially if they're about to tack to the left, right?
Yeah, Democrats always had a middle bench problem. They had all these elder statesmen, right?
Well,
and I mean,
they're
this
still
obviously,
right,
they still do.
Sort of oligarchs still kicking around, right?
But for a while, I mean, the Biden presidency really laid bare the problems with that. You've had, Pelosi's about to retire. The Steny Hoyer retired. That's sort of her camp of allies are all sort of retiring. Bernie's still there, but I mean, is Bernie Sanders really going to be elected president? Does anybody think this? Does anybody think Bernie Sanders is the real leader of the Democratic Party? So now you have this problem where no one was waiting in the wings to sort of be statesman-like, to actually lead the party. Everyone's been trying to get on. Everyone is young, right? So they were people like AOC. She's the perfect example. She entered politics in the social media age, in the Trump age. So people like Gavin Newsom have had to reorient themselves over the past 10 years to try to define themselves in opposition to Trump or to try to out-Trump Trump. The younger people are just doing this for their own personal brand and for the hopes of their future electoral prospects. And whether or not this pays off for their electoral prospects, the one thing it absolutely does is it leaves the Democratic Party without a leadership.
Well, that's the thing, as a point you make so eloquently there, is the fact that everyone's either like 85 years old and gazillionaires who've been in Congress or on the Senate for decades and decades and decades, or they're these young, kind of untried Mandami figures who, he's, whatever you think of him, he's clearly had an impressive rise. Well, he's so young. Where's, in the middle, you got Gavin Newsom. That's about it.
This is the downside of being the cool party, right? Because the old people were grandfathered in literally, right? They've been around forever. And sure, they marched with, Dr. King, or they signed some sort of important legislation in the 70s. So they, Joe Biden, those folks, Nancy Pelosi were allowed to stay in, or they were the first to do something, the first woman, the first African-American, whatever. But then, I mean, they had these people. They had, Martin O'Malley. They had Howard Dean. Think about all these people, right? Yeah. They all ran for president. They got laughed out of the party. They're all cashing checks in the private sector now. Like, when was the last time we heard from Howard Dean? When was the last time we heard from Martin O'Malley? Like, these guys could have been the Democratic Party leadership in waiting, and they were completely drummed out.
Rebecca, can you see anyone emerging yet? I mean, it's shaping up to me from where I'm sitting right here. It looks like that, it's going to be a Rubio-Vance ticket, possibly on the Republican side. They are the ones to beat right now. We're still, 3 years out? Who do you see on that ticket for the Democrat side, yeah?
I pray that Kamala just gives us a throwback, just run it back for old time's sake.
Season 1 was so brilliant, right?
Let's grab a marg. Let's talk about policy. No, I mean,
the laugh. Just bring the laugh back.
I do think it's fascinating to see which candidates they're trying out and which ones are cycling out. I mean, in the California gubernatorial race, Katie Porter, a horrendous experience that is. But now they're talking about potentially replacing her with Senator Alex Padilla. They're kind of scrambling to try and plug all of these different leaks, and it's pretty dire.
It seems to me the Democratic Party is still at war with itself. It hasn't got over what happened last year. You got former White House press secretaries saying they're leaving the Democrat Party forever. You guys, you're of the Republican flavor, I suspect. Are you in any way worried about any of them?
I mean, I was reading some of the books from some of the officials that were involved in the previous administration or the previous election. You kind of see a recurring theme, which is that they're pointing the finger at everybody else. Yeah. It seems like
no one's fault.
No attempt to actually conduct a thorough, honest autopsy of what happened in 2024. And I feel like that's just going to bite them in the back. I mean, I don't foresee this actually being a successful strategy for them. All
right, Tim, Rebecca, stay there. Coming up, 1 in, 1 out, more like, more out and then back in on the boats. I'll explain it after the break. Don't go anywhere. I'll explain it properly. Welcome back to Harry Cole Saves the West. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. You won't miss a thing. Well, it's one of those stories you couldn't make up. I tried to explain it before the break badly, but let's have another go at it now. A migrant deported to France under Britain's shiny new 1 in, 1 out deal just simply rode straight back to Britain after being deported. Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy insists it's proof the system is working. Because if working in that way clearly means a different word to him. This crackdown has been much heralded by Prime Minister Keir Starmer as his fix for illegal migration, in the fact that one person crossing the sea on boats lands in Britain and is deported back in return for one legal migrant who is allowed to settle here. Complicated? Yes. Working? Clearly not. We're going to be joined by RJ Howman from the Heritage Foundation shortly. But Tim and Rebecca are here with me in the studio. Look, I've just tried to explain that in the simplest way I possibly could. Record numbers of illegal migrants are crossing the Channel in Britain. 53,000, I think it is, this year. In the US, Donald Trump was elected at a similar time to Keir Starmer. Crossings of the southern border, 0. Tim, I mean, from where you're sitting, what is Donald Trump getting right? And what is the rest of the world seemingly incapable of doing? What's the magic sauce?
I'm so glad you asked this, because this is one of my favorite things to talk about. The magic sauce is that Donald Trump has just cut through all the nonsense, cut through all the policy talk and the different calculations and the trade-offs, and he just said, I want no border crossings. Do whatever needs to do it. Done. Get him out of here. He probably said that exactly, right? Get him out of here. So deportations and increased border security. We just reported today that there was an illegal immigrant who was implicated in the murder of a Texas woman. It was revealed that the immigrant came through using the CBP-1 app, right? This is the app under the Biden administration that said people are going to come in illegally one way or the other. Let's give them this app and let's just do it so it's legal, but it's quick. That seems to me to be what the UK's policy is, something like that, right? We can't necessarily stop it, so let's try to manage it or let's try to strike some sort of balance with it. The second you get into those trade-offs, it's really you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, right? That's what's happening.
Exactly. I mean, it is a slightly... I'm going to try one more time to explain this properly. So people cross the Channel from France, illegal migrants. They have no right to claim asylum in the UK. They are then sent back to France. In return, France gives Britain one person who can claim legal asylum, one in, one out. It hasn't really worked so far. But as Tim says, this sort of tinkering is rendered entirely pointless when, the guy gets deported back to France and he's back in Britain by breakfast time, having just got straight back on the small boat, right? It's baffling.
Yeah, I mean, it's pointless. It's overly complicated. I think that the approach that President Trump has taken, which, as Tim said, is just no nonsense. I think that there's still a lot of other countries in the West that are obviously dealing with this problem of mass migration, but the problem is that they're still trying to approach it with this empathetic worldview, where they're sort of trying to overcomplicate the legal system to sort of let some people in, but maybe politely decline others. And it's just, as you said, it's just totally ineffective. Really, the only logical way to approach this issue is to just get in there and say, all right, we're closing the lid.
Well, I mean, it's not just Britain, it's not just America. In Ireland, they're literally rioting on the streets after, as you say, sort of criminal attacks by migrants on the local population. This is a tinderbox. It strikes me that maybe the president is the exception here. But other governments across the West seem to be spectacularly out of kilter with where the public anger is on this one, and don't seem to have realised that the populations have moved on so much further than where the politicians are.
I think that's right. I think there's this sense among the kind of global political class, to use a phrase, the people are wrong, right? The people are just a little bit too, they're a little bit
voters are wrong.
The voters are wrong.
They were taught about the great,
they're a little bit, they're too heartless.
Yeah.
They're thinking too parochially. They're not seeing the big picture. And of course, the big picture is that we're seeing the big picture. The big picture is not a pretty picture. I also think that people that look. Most people that get elected to governments are some sort of do-gooder, right? They want to make some sort of change.
I like to think everyone wants to help the world, right?
Especially if you get elected to public office, you want to help people who are less fortunate than you, right? 15, 20 years ago, we in the West used to do that by spreading democracy and toppling dictators. You're not allowed to do that anymore. That's not fashionable anymore. Yeah. So instead of improving these other countries, what do? Well, we have to let them into our countries. And this is something that President Trump, I think you're right, he was the outlier. He was not afraid to say, it's bad in these countries, but he also said, we're not going in there and we're not letting their people in here.
Tim, hold that thought. I think we've got RJ Harman tonight with us. Down the line, there he is. Welcome back to Save the West, sir. I know you've had a little bit of difficulty there, but we've got you now from the Heritage Foundation, RJ Harman. We were just discussing there, I don't know if you heard there, RJ, just quite how out of touch it seems vast swathes of Western politicians are with the anger, the boiling anger of their populations. And that disconnect is fundamentally quite dangerous, right?
No, I mean, I saw it again when I was across the pond and debating in Oxford and everything. You had a lot of, again, like cab drivers and everything that were afraid to even make their voice heard when they did, at the polling booth and everything. But what we're seeing, I'm seeing it on two fronts here. After President Trump won on a clear mass deportation mandate of about 75 million Americans clearly voted for the enforcement of our immigration laws. And now suddenly we're pivoting to, okay, it's the worst of the worst. I mean, you had that gentleman sing, the second driver, who kills 3 Americans. Now, is he suddenly the worst of the worst? Now he's eligible for deportation? You shouldn't need to see blood on the pavement before you deport somebody after 75 million Americans make their voice heard. And then second, you're seeing it on the H-1B stuff too, the guest worker visas. They're temporary in nature, but they're permanent, okay? When I led this group of college Republicans about 5 years ago in COVID, we had the same ask essentially as the strongest bill we're seeing on Capitol Hill. Okay, it was like pause H-1B. You kind of do a small reform, and then you end STEM OPT. Trump's doing these fees and everything. It doesn't do jack shit. Okay, I'll be honest with you. I'll be blunt. We're
past
baseline
the watershed. It's fine.
Just isn't there. So it's frustrating. The American people made their voice clear. We got to adhere to it, or we're going to pay in the midterms, and then our consultant class is going to say it was for the wrong reason. When we didn't deliver, not because we did something that they view as controversial.
But President Trump is delivering record. Border crossings the lowest since the 1970s. Catch and release, where people are sort of cross illegally, of ground to a halt. There is, it seems to me that America is actually having some success here when you compare it to perhaps UK and
America's having success when it comes to shutting crossings off at the border. But when it comes to mass deportation, right now what's going on is a little bit of book cooking, okay? The self-deportation numbers that we're seeing, they're trying to pay people to use an app and stuff. They're counting, Coast Guard arrests on the ocean. Excuse me, sorry about
that's
that.
All right.
On the ocean.
I mean, it all happens here. That's not even the first time.
I'm in the airport. I'm sorry, but no, listen. They're kind of cooking the books a little bit, not in adherence to the election. So,
RJ Harman, you stay there. You sort your shot out, and I'll come back.
I gotta go speak.
I mean, that's not even the first time that's happened on the show. Rebecca, we haven't heard from you from a while. What I think the point Tim was making there before, I think he either fell over or his phone fell over, was that actually, illegal migrations crossing. Oh, I got the giggles now. Illegal migrations crossing on the southern border are one thing, but again, the other great elephant in the room is the massive amounts of legal migration that far dwarf any illegal crossings.
Yeah, I just think that there's increasingly not an appetite for this sort of thing, not just in the United States, but all across the West. I mean, we've seen protests become increasingly popular where you're protesting not just illegal migration, mass migration in general, demographic changes that are just too abrupt for certain, neighborhoods to sustain. And I think that's becoming increasingly a problem that they can't ignore. You said these elected officials that they feel that they might know better than the voters or than their constituents, but in reality, they're not the ones living in neighborhoods where they are actually impacted by the problem.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's all very easy for politicians to lecture from their ivory towers, especially when they've made lots of money out of their, being in politics itself. One of the things that happened in this country, in America, is that, there was a populist uprising against the political class. We were talking earlier about where this generation of politicians that talk about sound money and things like that gone. Well, they were swept away on this MAGA wave. Rebecca, do you think it's time for MAGA to be sort of exported around the world? Is it time to show best practice on that and send it over to Britain?
I think it's already happening. I mean, maybe not so much in the
hats,
tangible
but,
political sense, but culturally, definitely in the grassroots, you're seeing an uprising where they're not just rejecting mass migration, but just a general populist sentiment is becoming increasingly popular. And I think it's just about time that we're going to see something resembling the MAGA movement in other Western countries.
Yeah, Tim, do you think it's time for Europe's MAGA moment? I mean, The problem in mainland Europe, I think, is actually the far right is far more organised than it is in Britain. Britain is kind of blessed, actually, in the fact that the far right and the far left are basically clowns on both sides. And actually, Nigel Farage is, he is of the right, but he is, there is a fringe of extreme right wingery beyond him. Whereas in Europe, it strikes me as, the far right is a little bit more mainstream. Is that fair, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fair. And so I do think I want to be very careful when I say this. I think, yes, it's time for Europe to have its own sort of MAGA movement. And by that, I mean literally taking the expression of American conservatism as espoused by Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans and applying that to their countries. Not necessarily, not make England great again, maybe
make America great Britain again, I think is the...
Yeah, well, I just, whenever European conservatives start getting riled up, I start thinking about, parades in the street and thrones and altars and things like that. So maybe just keeping a different type of conservatism in mind.
But, I mean,
populism.
What it comes down to is, though, that unless politicians of all stripes and of all countries wake up to what is happening, wake up to that, not even that silent majority anymore. People are, they're making their voices heard. If they don't wake up to it, they deserve to be swept out of office, right?
Of course they do. I think it's just a matter of who's going to come after them, right? That was the key, and this was, if you remember, almost 10 years ago now, right? Maybe less than 2 years into the first Trump administration. Oh, who's going to pick up the MAGA mantle? It's nothing. The Republican Party's done. It's over. Trump doesn't have beliefs. There's no such thing as Trump Republicans. This has been proved incredibly not true. You mentioned Vice President Vance and Secretary Rubio, to say nothing of all the younger people that are coming up through Congress and local governments, right? So, we were lucky on the one hand. Of course, this was an effort on, the part of certain individuals and groups, but I'm not familiar necessarily with what's happening in mainland Europe. But if there is a backbench of people waiting to sweep in, and if not, it's just the next Keir Starmer, right? It's the next whoever.
Yeah, I reckon that's what worries me. Is we talk about Donald Trump having success, but if these voters, so say Britain elects Nigel Farage. He sweeps in. He's obviously close to Donald Trump. He's obviously learning at his side. He's learning, trying to import to the United Kingdom a lot of that MAGA vibe. What happens, though, worries me, is what happens if they hit the same stumbling blocks. They hit the same legal roadblocks. They hit the same conventions and UN charters and Strasbourg courts and rights. It comes a point where actually it's the system that's cracked, right?
Yeah, I think, the rest of the world, no offense, is sort of downstream of the United States, at least politically. I think that's a fair thing to say. And so if we do see somebody like Nigel Farage come into power, I think there is going to be a lot of similarities to sort of what we had seen in the last decade or so take place under President Donald Trump's leadership. And so, but yeah, to Tim's point, I really just do think that it's going to be a matter of listening to your voters.
Yeah.
Novel idea, listening to your constituents.
Right?
Perhaps if there are these mass protests, maybe you should listen, or at least try to understand and see where the majority of your population is coming from. Just a suggestion, though.
At their peril, indeed. I think, sadly, guys, we have lost R.J. Holman tonight. I think he may. I don't know what airport he's stuck in, but I suspect he might be staying there for a little while without any phone signal. I hope there's a bar. I suspect there may have been. Guys, fascinating chat tonight. We again covered a lot of ground. Come back and see us again soon. Tim Rice from, I gotta get it right, Signal, Daily Caller, Daily Wire.
There it is. Harry.
Third time's the charm.
Third time's a charm. Plays much easier, Dave. Thank you folks for joining us tonight. That was all we've got time for. I will be back on Monday. I will see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe.